How do you say this? You're regelt. I'll try my best anyway. So, good morning, Budapest. Thank you for having me. So, my name is Clive. I'm based in Berlin, where I'm a freelance UX person, as Sarah already said as well. So, I've worked for many agencies and corporations, and still do. On the side, I also try to be a full-stack human being, whatever that means. Usually means I try to think about other ways that we can use our design skills to solve maybe real problems and not only make rich corporations richer. But that's for another talk. I'm also quite active in the community. Sarah mentioned the UX Camp Europe, which will take place next year again, which is, I think, one of the largest bar camps on the topic, held in Berlin every year, now again. And I've also revived the UX Book Club, which is a bi-monthly meetup where we actually look at books. That's still a thing. And we usually discuss a book somehow related to UX. I'm also a mentor for UX with Career Foundry. Career Foundry is an online learning platform where you can do a long course on UX and related topics. And in the last decade, as a UX person, I've obviously created many rectangles like this, and everywhere I go, I see wireframes. I cannot stop. You might know about all this. I'm also a proud member of the Adobe XDI team, and we're a group of freelancers from all over Europe, which means we partner with Adobe. We're not full-time employees. We give workshops, trainings, and so on the software, and you can also meet me at the booth outside if you want to learn a bit more about XD. Also join me for a workshop on Wednesday. We'll talk about that later. Generally, if you ask 5 UX people what they do, you get about 8 different answers. So I like this meme. And whoever you ask, it usually involves wireframing and something with post-it notes. So I think we can all agree on that. Voice and conversational design, I think, has just recently entered the arena, at least in the wider UX community. And I want to share with you today why and how I fell in love with voice. I would encourage you to do the same, or at least raise some enthusiasm, and show you a few pointers of what you could do to get started, and the mindset you might want to adopt when you start falling in love with voice. So my story with voice starts with this pretty little device. I'm generally not an early adopter for technology, so it's probably my German side. I like to be a bit skeptical, and when Alexa came to Germany in 2016, it left me pretty unfazed, to be honest. I thought it's a toy for lazy middle-class people that don't want to get off their couch if they want to switch on their lights. But then I got this as a speaker present at World Usability Day and began thinking about the possibilities and what this actually means for us as designers. So I really started geeking out a little bit. Then luckily, Career Foundry, where I already said I'm a mentor for the classic UX course, also offers a specialization course in voice, which means you go through about 120 hours of content with a mentor as well, who's experienced in the field. And it's actually a course that has been certified by Amazon and shows you the ropes of voice. So this is a next step on my journey to geek out. I've had a few of my first client projects in voice, one for a big German health insurance company, and I created a chatbot concept as well. So it's nothing like Cheryl, who's been in the industry since 2006, which I think is amazing. And she's also one of my personal voice heroes, so it's really cool to share the stage with you here. So when it comes to voice, I'd say I'm still very much an explorer, even if I go in depth and geek out, and constantly in beta. But I think that's no problem, because I feel the whole industry as such, especially when it comes to design, is still very much in beta as well. And so are the devices and their current technical capabilities. I mean, those of you that have got these devices, I think no one would say they're all brilliant, everything works all the time. Actually, to be frank, I think they're still a little bit shit, to be honest. But still, this is why I think it's a good time to geek out in voice as well. Also, I'm not the only one who looks at it this way. Scott from Google says this. And I totally agree. It's often uncharted territory. There's multiple restrictions still in place, but a promise of a brighter future. There's also not too many white, old male experts there. So what's not to like? I think now is a really good time to start considering voice more seriously as designers. I also think it's a great way to maybe steer away from the state of the web that we also created in 2018. Beautiful. So I do think this is pretty much every website in 2018, and it's partly our fault as well. So one of the first rules of a good presentation is don't mention what you're not going to talk about today. I'm going to have to break this rule very quickly, because I think voice is just such a vast array that you can cover from different angles. So sadly today, I won't be talking about really useful skills that we might have. Currently there's over 50,000 skills on roughly 5,000 devices. If you look at Amazon alone, Google has similar numbers for the devices they cover. We can also not cover sort of bespoke industry solutions like we find here from Honeywell, which they have got in place to improve their picking and packing process. Also, the whole topic of a smart home is something that's really fascinating but worth its own talk. There's also a different angle. Ethics have been mentioned yesterday. So who do we actually want to give our voice to? Are these big corporations really acting in our best interest? So if we give our voice to Amazon, Google, and the likes, is this really what we want to do? There's a French provider called Snips who provide an alternative for voice solutions that run on device only. And I think they've got a very nice approach. So I do think another voice might be possible. We mentioned the open source initiative by Mozilla yesterday as well. I don't know how scalable it is in the long run, but it's definitely an angle you can look at as well. Again, sadly, we can't cover this today so much. I also think you should have a nuanced discussion about this. It's very easy to bash voice assistants and these evil corporations when we don't think about the wider context of the technology that we use. Again, this is a whole debate for another talk, but something to look into. So my focus for today is really for people like Anya. So Anya is a Career Foundry student in UX, and she reached out to me the other day asking basically, what do you need to be a VUI designer, a VUI UX designer as she calls it? Do you need to be more analytical? Do you need to have a background in music? She went to a UX camp in Hamburg and had a look at the workshop with Alexei, who's incidentally my mentor. But she says she's a more visual person, so she's not sure if she will be good at that. And it's exactly for people like this that my talk is for today. So we know the age-old discussions that we have in our industry. It still seems to be a thing. There's a workshop tomorrow on the whole topic. I would like to ask this question, actually. And while most of us are probably in this situation,
art director, creative leader, idea astronaut, the classification of UX designers is constantly evolving. This example might seem like a new and trendy breed, but this is in fact an old-school UX designer. Notice how the wallpaper on his Macintosh says Comic Sans, but the artwork itself is not composed of that particular font. This is considered funny by his peers. This specimen has unfortunately fallen into a state commonly known as pixel paranoia, as he is contemplating whether this button should be here, or there, or there. This kind of aesthetic compulsory behavior that separates him from the UX architect. This peculiar being spends most of his time reading reports, which enables him to answer any question with a reference to a theoretical study. An unfortunate side effect of this obsession is the lack of certain other skill sets. A crucial moment in the lifespan of the UX designer is the usability test. This is where all the hard work can be rendered useless in a matter of seconds. One wrong move from the user, and it's back to the drawing board. Disaster has struck. This designer will have to face a demoralizing process of coming up with a better solution. devastating. If you spot a UX designer interacting with common human beings, it is likely you are witnessing a ritual known as a workshop. The workshop consists of a small separated pack, writing as much as possible on sticky pieces of paper. This is often followed by the pack decorating the walls of their current habitat with these vibrant colours. Why they display this sort of behaviour, no one knows. These rituals often include awkwardly choreographed exercises assumed to enhance creativity amongst the tiny pack. The result is a quite extraordinary display of human behaviour. Only time will tell how many viable ideas, or maybe yet another creative job title, will come out of this act.
Oh, I feel you, brother. But what might voice offer people like this? No, thank you, man. So some of you might recognize yourself. I've seen a lot of beards as well and nice shirts, so there might be people like this here today. So why bother about voice as UX people or UX UI people? That's another debate as well, in the first place. Well, it is intrinsically human, and we as UX people take immense pride in being human-centered. And at least we tell everyone about it. So babbling along from a very early age is something that we do to interact with our world and with our parents, for instance. Parents always remember the first word their children said. So mine was Eule, for instance, owl in English, as a fun fact. And I don't think a lot of people or a lot of parents remember the first swipe or click their firstborn has ever had. As we grow older, we become master of designing for voice as well. And think about it, when was the last time an emoji or click or swipe gave you any goosebumps? I can't remember a time at all. It was probably a speech or words that have been well crafted and well designed. Some humans are also remembered for their last words, if they were clever enough. Hardly for their last like, their last swipe, or their last click. So this has been mentioned before, but I want to drive home, this is a really powerful movie if you're interested in voice or AI and the effects. We also know Knight Rider, Star Trek, and so on, and luckily, this is a far-fetched dystopia.
朝ですよ。起きてください。ねえ、起きてってば。おはよう。
おはよう。
あ、今日雨が降るかもしれないから傘持って行って。急がないと遅刻しちゃうよ。
行ってきます。
いってらっしゃい。気をつけてね。
状況ページ、商品のラインナップについての。
おかえりなさい。
なんかさ、家で誰かが待ってるっていいもんだな。さっき思ったんだ。帰ってくるとき。おやすみ。
おやすみなさい。
So there you go, her in a box, yours $1,200 in Japan, all being lovingly designed by some kind of designers. Again, I think stuff for another talk. Whatever we think of these tendencies, I really believe, and I'm not on my own, that voice is growing and growing, and it will be here to stay. So we have to face it as designers. So we've actually come a long way from these long-winded IVR chats that we might know from telephone or call centers to one-shot solutions, instructions that combine multiple variants into one quick order, and that will let you comply a task really quickly. From Radio Rex, which was actually a voice user interface toy from 1911, which is a little dog that lives in his hut, and if you shout Rex, it comes out of the hut. To new advances here, like a fully artificial intelligent dog, Aibu, a Sony product released this year, that you can talk to, that you can stroke, that makes cute little gestures. We have come a long way. And even if these things are far from being perfect, the adoption rate is just huge. We know some of the popular devices here, and this is a new generation of Echo devices, looking eerily similar to this. Again, things for another talk. And according to ComScore, by 2020, 50% of all searches will be voice searches. And already now in the US, there's roughly 50% of adults and teens that use voice search on a daily basis. So even if you're an SEO, time to think about your strategy here, I guess. Here are some stats from my native Germany. I think they're mainly based on WhatsApp, and I think you see this more often. Humans adapting and hacking technology as well in a different way, maybe that manufacturers have never thought about. So the interactions with our machines change as well via the medium. So I think this is really interesting from an interaction design point of view as well. Also, an often overlooked possibility or chance for voice, I think, is just the possibility to get things done quicker, not being glued to your screen all the time. This is, for instance, an initiative not basically based on voice, but is a large army of ex-Googlers and Facebook people that have left these companies because they realize the monsters they have created for sucking our attention on screen. So I think voice might be a chance there. You generally open, shoot, and leave, which gives you, in theory, time for more valuable things. So let's geek out a little bit. How can we help our friend here with his pixel paranoia and all other designer friends that we might know? We're roughly, all of us, somewhere here. So we're very much used to designing for the eye. Well, this is very rude in England, designing for the eyes. And we've got artifacts for this, like a beautiful wireframe here. Voice is very much here, so it's about designing for your ears. And it's sound waves, and at the very core of it, it's really words that are our design material. If you look around the internet, on Twitter, this is probably one of the most popular hashtags on voice, voice first, which is often mistaken with voice only, and we'll touch on that later a bit as well. We'll get back to that later. But voice first is a good way to think about these interactions. You might trigger an interaction with your voice, maybe go somewhere else, and maybe return to voice later. But I'm going to tell you now, don't tell anyone else. We, as UX people, are actually quite well equipped to tackle these challenges. If we look at the process, the user-centered design process, it's just as applicable to any voice project as it would be to any GUI project. We've got the same phases. We've got the same mantras and the same books that still apply. Don't make me think. We might add another mantra. Don't make me tap. You can't touch this when you use voice, by and large. But it's nothing to forget about. It's just to be taken on board. The process and our main challenge to make sense of a huge squiggly mess is usually the same as well. And pick any design thinking chart that you like. Same philosophies apply to voice as well. We need to understand, explore, and materialize our products. So we're covered, really. We're quite good and well-versed of using this for our normal projects. We can apply this thinking to voice as well. Hopefully, you ask these questions, whether it's voice or not. So it's nothing to forget about when you think about a voice user interface. A few nuances that you might want to consider. There are slight variations within these phases, and I'll talk about these and touch about these now in the remaining time. Would be within these phases, you might want to adopt a different way of approaching things. Of course, there's an O'Reilly book for that. So you might want to think adding a parrot to your polar bear, because designing for voice is a very different beast on an information architecture level. There's no really deep hierarchy, no complex navigation so much. It's usually, although we aim for conversations, it's quite linear, transactional. You might go off your happy path more often than expected, but you have to apply a different kind of thinking. You cannot really think about creating a big web portal the same way as you would designing for voice. In any way, I really recommend this book by Casey Pearl, who's now with Google and does amazing work there, to add this to your classics, to your classic UX library if you're serious about voice. You also have to think about how do users use these things, of course. Generally, the attention span is pretty short within voice. So you've got a peak moment where you want to do something and you want it to be done quickly. Then you might leave again, you might leave the room, you might leave the device, come back to it at a later stage. You might get away with something like this if you do a visual user interface. I mean, this is really a dialog box from hell. But you might be able to click here, click right, press the browser back and see what happens. Generally, it's not, the peak required is not so high. You might get there in the end. Something like this in voice, in a similar situation, and the user's gone. I guess often gone for good, and he'll tell everyone voice technology is crap. Don't bother about it. It doesn't work. So this is our responsibility to get this right as well. How do we react to situations like this? Also, I said it before, the happy path will be left more often than you can anticipate for. And then think about what can you actually do. We haven't got cute 404 pages, or we haven't got a cute browser game like this when the internet is off. So how do we react to our users? What do we tell them? What prompts do we give them? So a few considerations when you design for voice. If we have a look at the discovery phase, of course, we need a good use case. By and large, if you look at principles of good voice user interface design, this is true for skills, actions, or whatever. Some of these things are quite similar to creating for a screen as well. This is particularly relevant if you actually got a news website or something like the weather. You really have to be up to date. But everything we sort of aim for in our normal user interfaces also applies for voice, but we also have to always look for use cases that might make a task faster and easier. So if it doesn't make it easier or faster, there's no real point, in my opinion, unless we consider accessibility issues here. This is an exercise I like to do in sort of two-day workshops that I give. I won't do it now with you, but I encourage you just to get out your phone or your other device, open an app of your choice, try to create a meeting like this, and count and make a note of all the steps required, and time yourself while doing it as well. Have a look how many steps you counted along the way and the interface elements that you've encountered. You would have some form fields to enter, you would have some funny drop-downs to use more than once, all this being crafted by talented designers at Google Calendar for this instance. There's even more along the way. You have to use another drop-down, you have to find the location, you have to identify the real contact. Turns out there's more than one J in my life. Which one do I choose? Okay. And then finally, when I arrive there, I get another modal with some more call to actions around here. So everything, if I do this in workshops, it's usually 12 to 15 steps people take, and they can take anything from 45 seconds to 1.5 minutes, some even 2 minutes, just to fulfill this easy task. Contrast this to what you can do with voice. If you do a one-shot command, and it works well, it's one step, really, and it's a matter of seconds to fulfill a very mundane task with multiple variables that you would need another device for as well. I think this is one of the simple but very powerful examples of what voice can do. Another good exercise is to think about the current services or apps that you use and dig a bit deeper how they could be appropriate for voice. Might they enhance the whole experience? Might they even replace the whole experience that you've got at the moment? This is definitely a very good exercise to do as well. Just think about it maybe after this talk as well. Then maybe think about what if we find a use case for a voice in an elevator or a lift. I mean, voice is great, right? What could possibly go wrong?
What's the buttons?
Oh no, they installed voice recognition technology in this lift. I heard about this.
Voice recognition technology in a lift in Scotland. You ever tried voice recognition technology?
No.
They don't do Scottish accents.
11.
Could you please repeat that?
11!
11. 11.
11!
Could you please repeat that?
11.
Whose idea was this? You need to try an American accent. 11! 11!
That sounds Irish, not American.
What, doesn't it? 11!
Where in America is that? Dublin?
I'm sorry. Could you please repeat that?
Try an English accent, right? 11.
Well, you see where this is going. I encourage you to watch the whole video with subtitles. That might be quite useful. But so what have we got for GUI artifacts in our discovery phase? We're used to an empathy map, for instance. This is hopefully based on real insights. Hopefully it's co-created with many stakeholders and not just something that we think of. We know user personas. I mean, highly debated in the last few years, but I think they can still be a really useful tool if they're based on real research, if they're validated with people like customer service, for example, so people that really know your users. I still think this is a very useful tool. But an empathy map and a user persona can be useful for our voice projects as well. We know a customer journey map or the next level, a service blueprint, again, hopefully based on real research or knowledge from the real world. There's no reason not to apply this to our voice projects. But what might be a bit different when we design for our ears in the discovery phase, we want to consider the voice of our system as well. Because whether we like it or not, the moment we hear a voice, there's always a social meaning attached to it, and it will trigger assumptions in our head, if we like it or not. This can be social status or class, age, gender, regional background, for instance, personality, the emotional state of this voice, or even the attitude towards the spoken content. Is this person or this thing enthusiastic or bored? Something we need to take on board. So there is a sensible addition, I think, called a system persona when we create something for voice. And this can be a crucial part of any conversational user interface, a chatbot or voice. And it's a good idea to talk to branding or marketing people. They might know a lot about sort of the message your company wants to convey and the tone of voice you generally want to convey. So really, you use it very similar to user persona, but adds things like speaking style, maybe notable quotes that you would know from your persona, maybe add a little sample dialogue to get a feel for this person. And in this case, Annie, your travel companion. Also here, the speaking style is really important, as I mentioned before. You can also try to hack an empathy map for system persona. I haven't done it yet, but in my head, this makes a lot of sense. If you apply everything that we use for an empathy map as a basis for the user persona, there's no reason you couldn't use this for a system persona. Also, you've got this make or buy decision that you might have in your normal design projects as well. So do we use stock photography, stock illustrations, or do we actually get someone on board who does it in a customized way for us? So good voice, if you want to use it, doesn't come cheap. This is like a directory of voice-over actors and artists that you can pay. So maybe you want a pre-recorded MP3 that you can use within your Alexa skill, for instance. Jamie Oliver does this as an example because he's a notable voice. Things you might want to think about. Again, branding, marketing might know someone good from a recent campaign, maybe a television campaign or a radio campaign. So it makes sense to align your VUI efforts with these people in any case. Here, I think, is a really nice addition that we can use for all our projects, but I think for voice, it has particular value, is the whole concept of placeowners. So you think about the space and the context that your device or your service will be living in, and think about all the modalities at your disposal, and see what this means. So if my hands are dirty, I probably don't want to use them, but my eyes are free, my ears are free, my mouth is free. Oopsie. a good chance for voice user interface. If someone in the design team of this elevator with our Scottish friends would have used the Playsona, maybe they would have just created better buttons and not worry about the voice user interface in the first place. So I think this is really useful. Another nice thing that you can use is also a tool that we know from our design process, so scenario mapping. Another example from the BBC that they use for children's skill or children's app. And here, they really focus on the tone of voice as well, in addition to the other things and the devices that this person uses. A great tool that you can apply for any voice project. Also, Futurize, a great Finnish company, they released this open source board game for co-creating IoT experiences, and you can very easily scale it down only for voice. So you've got a board game with artifacts that you can 3D print as well, and think about what does this mean? Voice for business, what does it mean if we have an Alexa, if we have an Echo, for instance, in every meeting room? Could we use it at our front of reception when no one is there to onboard people maybe, or to give them directions? What could this mean in a hospital if we have it in wards? It's a really nice way of thinking about any Internet of Things service, but very easily adaptable to voice as well. If we look at the further phases of concepting, prototype, user testing, these very much overlap. I mean, they overlap in normal GUI projects as well. In voice, they overlap even more, in my opinion. There's no clear-cut handover points here. If we think about one of our mantras in UX or design thinking, it's very much show, don't tell. And we're well-versed in using this. So get your ideas from your brain onto paper. Do some scribbling. Use different levels of fidelity for wireframes. You've got tools here. I copied this from the Hungarian XD site. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it probably means something with prototyping. We've got trusted tools of the trade that we can use. What does this mean for our ears? How do we translate show, don't tell here? No one ever said this. So how do we create a wireframe for our ears? It's very simple. It really goes back to basics. It's all about creating dialogues and conversation. And to me, although it might not seem super sexy, it's the purest form of interaction design that we have. And we might want to think about this. So really, you write your sample dialogues, and they fulfill all the needs that your classic wireframe would do. It's just a matter of killing lorem ipsum, which is really great. So we won't get away with placeholder copy or placeholder content. We really have to think about the content and the words that we create. So it's all about writing, talking, repeating the whole thing all over and over again. So testing, early testing often is very important in this phase as well. You can still use post-it notes, mind, so that's the good news if you like to do. You can borrow methods from acting. So talk to your local screenwriter, filmmaker, or actor, or even better, get them on your team. Learn from their experience with an exercise called table reading, for instance, where just two people sketch out this dialogue. Think about a flashback to 2014. You were the designer at Amazon, and you had to wireframe one of the first Alexa core skills. What type of dialogues would you think about? You might want to think about alternatives. So it's really all you need is a word processing tool to think about these wireframes for your ears. Here's another one. Think about what happens if you use the happy path. I can't say it more than enough. How do you speak to your user? Take all these restrictions into account, and how far into the future can the user set an alarm? It all needs to be designed. It's all design, and it's our job as well, I think. We cannot only leave it to developers and marketers. Nothing against these people. We love you and we need you. But this, to me, is classic design work. So if you think about wireframes for your ears, think about some of these key points. Be aware of these rules and be aware when to break them, of course, as well. Think about things like this as well. How do people talk? It's very different to how people write. And you might have little tools at your disposal like conversation markers, contractions, SSML tags that you can use. I mean, even if it's getting a bit technical, you can think about this as a design as well. Alexa, at least in the US, can now whisper at you as well. And you whisper at Alexa, it will whisper back at you. So think about these things. And this is good practice anyway. Oopsie. This is good practice anyway, avoiding technical and legal jargon. What else have we got for our eyes? We've got wireflows maybe when we've got our wireframes in place. If we think about our ears, it's all back to good old process charts and process flows and task flows. You might think about your main intents, create an overview of your user's main intents, and then create a flow. So it's all the good old boring task flow stuff that we might have learned in our basic interaction or information architecture course now come in really handy as well again. Also, recently announced at Adobe Max 2 weeks ago, there's now a possibility in XD to actually prototype or demo, I'd say more demo in voice. So we've added voice as a new trigger. And you can really easily create, in this case, little interactions for an echo show in this instance. And if you're interested in that, you can visit me at the booth later on. We can talk about that later. There's also tools like storyline or dialogue flow that you can use that go a bit deeper, a bit more developer, but basically for this, what you see is what you get approach. If you're used to using a very visual design tool, there's a great method now in XD to use this. What more have we got for our eyes? This might be dead, pretty much, the specification. It's still a thing in Germany for lots of my projects for big corporations. I still do these use specifications. For your ears, I think they're really still a thing. So you really want to sketch it out. If you go into the fine conceptual phase, they're not very sexy, but they're useful. You really have to dissect your flow bit by bit and specify the hell out of your dialogue. It's very, very waterfall, but really, really useful as well. What else have we got for our eyes? We know our use labs and our eye tracking, our A/B testing methods. For our ears, Wizard of Oz testing is really the way to go. So you can hide behind a wall here, for instance, like the BBC team did, and read out what the system would respond. And that's basically it for VUI as far as I'm concerned. Of course, you can still sit people in a use lab, but this is really enough. Use any artifact or real devices. You could use a Pringle pack as well, instead of an Amazon device here. You can also, if you've got an Amazon developer account, you can beta test very early, share it with your network to ask them to test it, or when you've gone live, you can share it as well within the Amazon developer console. So, to recap, as a designer, you're already well versed with a lot of things to do for voice. There's a few different things that are slightly different. And if we think about voice first, and not only voice only, we also have to think about multimodality. I'm going to touch on this really, really quick now. So the Echo Spot has entered the arena. So has the new version of the Echo Show. There's no sound here, which makes it really simple to use different use cases as well. You might start something with your voice and see something on the screen. I have to skip over. Google joined the party on October the 9th, so Google Home Hub looks very, very similar, I think, to our Echo devices. These guys have joined the party. I don't know what that means. Could be very weird. You ought to let them into your house. Other multimodalities you might want to think about is something, look how happy these people are, is the Echo button, which you can use for very simple games, but I've also seen it hacked for like sports apps, for instance, where you can try to do very quick exercises by using the Echo button. And to tell the truth, to me, voice has always been multimodal. I mean, the ring, the buttons, all this has been designed right from day one into our devices. So it's not a new thing, really. It's just an extension of what they can do now with an added screen. And these things have always been useless without an app. You always need an accompanying app to do it. So multimodality has been built in from the start, I feel. Finally, what do we do when we talk about multimodality with all our wonderful emojis and icons? Well,
you've got mail.
There's a thing called the earcon. And I encourage you to listen to this great podcast by the product designers for Facebook Messenger and the Google Pixel, where they really talk about the design process about these icons for your ears. Fascinating stuff, and the amount of detail and design work going into that is really something we need to take into account as well. So really, it's time for collaboration. Should designers learn to speak? Absolutely, I think. And we should listen and learn to the people that know about these things. So get out of our silos. Talk to these people. Oops. get them onto our team, learn from their experiences. They know what it means to craft something meaningful about voice, language, and sound. Also, we can't do it without these, of course. What backend calls are we making? What data are we asking the user for? What technical constraints are there? We cannot create something meaningful without these, but we shouldn't leave it only to them, I think. This is a recent stat that I've learned. I think this is really interesting. It is hard work, and it's really hard to get voice right and to get it done in a good way. So, to wrap up, I think this makes a lot of sense. Don't believe the hype. It's just one more modality we need to design for. It's not new. It's just an addition to our skill core set. So, talking to Anya, I absolutely beg you to consider voice as a designer. Don't only leave it to developers or marketeers. A handful of things you can do really quickly. Of course, there's a workshop tomorrow. If you've got a chance, get in there. This will go much, much deeper than what I managed to cover today. Add a parrot to your library. Think about the voice principles. There's a really nice collection by Ben here about different voice principles. Listen to a podcast like VUX World. I think he does a weekly or bi-weekly, really good insights into what teams use in the voice sphere. Look at everything that Alexa or Google publishes. There's gold in there, even if it's more directed at developers. You could dive really deep, take the same course that I've taken. There's even a little discount code here if you're interested, and this presentation will be shared later. But do take enough time for this. You can download the Amazon Alexa UI kit from Behance. It will soon be part of XD, so you can access it from there, play around a little bit. Of course, you can visit me as well for my XD workshop. Look how happy this person is. Well, I'll cover on voice very shortly, amongst other things. And yeah, it would be really great if we can just connect and keep the conversation going. And I'm available for all these things. Talk to me, meet me at the booth. That's it. Thank you very much. Sorry,
thank you, Clive. Excellent. Questions? Lighting up. There's some that are controversial.
Go for it.
And I have feels about them. I'm just going to go for this. I'm going to go for the first one.
Go for it.
What do you think about the trend of calling people UX/UI designers?
Oh, that's a pet hate of mine, actually.
Mine as well.
How much time have we got?
And it said, the second part of the question was, do they actually exist for real, or is it a myth?
I think I know two that are worth this title. I see a lot of junior people being called UX/UI designers or announcements as well, specifically in the startup world in Berlin. And sometimes maybe it's enough for this, but I feel these people, when I meet them, they're very talented people, but often they're graphic visual designers that do a bit of UX on the side. But they have hardly ever done a content inventory or complex information architecture, which might be enough for some of the projects, but I do feel it diminishes sort of our old craft a little bit as well. Even I might sound like an old fart now, but it's probably what I'm. So I'm a failed graphic designer myself, and I moved into UX for good reason, I think, and hardly do any visuals anymore.
Yeah, and it goes the other way. Yeah, I mean, it goes both ways, right?
Exactly.
I have no business designing any of this, but I'm definitely a UX person and vice versa, right? So, and I think that's like self-knowledge also, too. So I actually wanted to look at some of the voice questions.
Yeah.
So this one is actually about how could a UX researcher get involved with voice design and testing? Tips.
Tips? That's a very good question. I would say you get on board and use this. Get yourself accustomed to the Wizard of Oz technology or the methodology, which is nothing revolutionary. But of course, you have to think maybe about the recruiters that you work together with, the test people you work together with, and I think there's nothing really very different to normal usability tests. You just apply it to what's possible within voice. And the task it's not that task-based, it's very much dialogue-based, so you have to learn about this as well. So you probably might be involved in creating more than as a researcher in voice than you would be in the GUI world.
Yeah, because it seems like when you were showing that Wizard of Oz testing, that's also, it's because it's not just a testing, but it's probably also very responsive to what you're seeing or what you're hearing from the
As far as
person
I
who's
know,
done.
there wasn't a dedicated research on that. It was just designers doing it.
Right, okay.
With research background, I guess.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so here's one about voice search. So maybe it isn't as significant as it was predicted for 2020. When was the last time you did a search on Google with your voice?
Not on Google, but on my Echo at home. I do it all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, this one's interesting. So let's say that your company doesn't have a project like this on the horizon. What would be a good kind of starting project or a pet project or a side project you might try?
So I think because it's really easy to get your skill published right now. It's nowhere near as getting something in the App Store, for instance, because I think Amazon is just hungry for our voices. It's very low level to actually run a little hackathon or design jam over a weekend and get something up there. For instance, Xing, which is like the German LinkedIn, they've got a skill up there in the cloud where you can learn about the birthday of your contacts, who has visited your profile. So nothing groundbreaking or revolutionary, but the team's already got accustomed to what you need to do for voice. The developers know the ins and outs of the platform, and it's a very easy way to get up there. So I think, and even big media outlets, they just use a hackathon to get ideas and then get stuff up there.
Yeah.
So it's still a bit of a gold digger mentality there right now.
Yeah,
and even you think, this might be a bit weak or a bit naff, at least you know sort of the ropes of what it takes to create something like that.
Yeah.
So
skills, it's like a fairly, because I noticed that too. Like
skill is the Alexa word. Actions would be the word for Google. It's basically, it's like an app for voice. If you want to put it. So just like an app, it should do a few things, but do these really well.
Yeah. I have ideas now. I'm like, oh, I had not thought of making my skills. Let's see. So, where am I? In your view, won't we end up with devices providing visual support for the primary voice interactions? I'm not totally sure I understand the question.
Yeah, I'm not totally sure as well. So maybe it's the question, how do we design these things? I mean, at least with the Echo Show, Amazon now has got a partnership with Getty Images. Until recently, it was only Bing and Wikipedia, for instance. So you couldn't really control so much what you would see there. Yeah. And that's a whole big mess as well. So you couldn't use YouTube on your Amazon device because Google doesn't want it. You couldn't use Skype on your Amazon device because Microsoft doesn't want this. Right. So it's a bit like these browser wars of the 80s, optimized for Netscape, optimized for Internet Explorer, or the iOS wars I think we had on mobile. So it's a bit like that, and says a lot about the maturity of the industry, I think, as well.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Clive. And then he has his workshop coming up. You can see him at the booth.
Exactly.
Let's give a round of applause for Clive Lavery.
Köszönöm.
I have a gift for you.
Oh!
Awesome.